Good morning. Good news. I promise you this is the last time that Glenn is making you listen to me. So in this talk, I was asked to say a word about how we prepare for negotiations for transformative agreements, which is something that the universities of South Africa are approaching. Of course, negotiating license agreements or other sorts of agreements with publishers is nothing new. It's not that we discovered this suddenly and are telling the world about, oh, there are negotiations. But one thing that we've experienced is that moving into negotiations over such drastically new types of agreements often involves people who have not previously been involved in the negotiation process, and often should involve people who are not experienced negotiators. And so the basic framing for my recommendations or observations here from our experience has to do with heading into a new type of negotiation with a new approach or a new team, and some of the things that you all might want to think about in getting ready for that. Just sharing from what we've learned. As I told you before, we, in June of last year, our system of 10 universities agreed to start negotiating transformative agreements as one of our major strategies for accelerating open access. So at that point, we were approximately in the place you all are today, that we had system-wide agreement that we were going to do this, but then the question was, how are we going to do it? What are we going to do? I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the key steps we took to get into this past year of negotiations. First, obviously, somebody has to be your negotiator or negotiating team. I want to say a word about how we select our negotiating team and why you might want to think about it being a different team. Usually for university negotiations with publishers, there's a small permanent group, in your case in Sandlick, in our case in our California Digital Library office, our consortium office, that manages all subscription negotiations, at least for consortial subscriptions. This is a different type of negotiation and might call for somewhat different representation. So we formed a team that represented our coalition, which we felt was so important to be able to go forward with negotiating a different type of license. That is, our negotiating team included faculty, it included senior library administrators, and the professional negotiators. So we expanded beyond the usual approach to include key representatives of our coalition. There are two reasons for that, basically, one going inward and one going outward. Going inward, we wanted our stakeholders to feel like they understood what was going on, that they had a say in what was going on, and they could contribute to it so that they stayed part of what we were up to and could feel represented and heard in terms of the back and forth that goes on in negotiations as we develop new ways of accessing content. Looking outward, we wanted the publishers to know that we had a coalition and that we were negotiating on behalf of actively involved faculty and actively involved librarians and actively involved university administrators, so that they were sitting right there at the table and could say, here we are, we actually are part of this and you need to listen to us. We're not, this is not just our professional negotiators, we are the stakeholders. So we think that was pretty effective. And to give you a quick example, I may have mentioned it yesterday, in our Elsevier negotiations, we had a team of 6. 3 of that team were tenured faculty members in various of our universities. 2 of them elected leadership from the faculty senate, and I was the 3rd. I also represented university library leadership. Establish clear roles for what you're going to do, especially when you go in with a negotiating team that does not have a track record or experience of negotiating. What we did, there are other ways of doing it, but what we did is we actually had co-chairs. We had 2 chairs of the negotiating team and of the larger task force that backed up the negotiating team. Part of that was because the project was large. We were entering a new type of negotiation with a number of different publishers simultaneously, one of them enormous and very complex, the Elsevier negotiation. So we felt like we needed to share the burden a bit, but also it was to bring in different perspectives. One of the co-chairs was our chief negotiator, who has been doing this for years and years on our behalf and is absolutely fabulous. Many of you know her, Ivy Anderson. And one of the co-chairs was to represent the stakeholders. In that case, it was me. I was the co-chair of the negotiations task force and team, representing both the libraries and the faculty. The co-chairs, well, I'm going to get to what they do in a moment, but we felt that we wanted to make it clear that everybody on the team can speak during the negotiations. It's not that the co-chairs are the only ones who can speak, but we need to be clear on the decision structure and who speaks for the team. And I'll say another word about that in a moment. And then finally, we also wanted to designate our public spokespeople so that when the media started calling, as they did, and when we reached out to the media, we had a consistent, clear message about what was going on in negotiations with different publishers. Some of that is to be careful. We did not have non-disclosure agreements. We refused to enter non-disclosure agreements even about our negotiations. But we did have gentle persons agreements that we would not share the details of what people said in the negotiating room, that we would respect the negotiating room as a place of safe conversation on both sides where we wouldn't be quoting each other to the press, although we might talk about the general nature of where the negotiations stood and what the offer details were and so forth. So we needed to control that information, also just to be consistent in our messaging. Rather than giving many different versions of what was happening, we felt we needed to be consistent. So we designated spokespeople. So the roles in a little more detail, in the negotiation sessions, the chairs were the ones authorized in a negotiation meeting to make details of offers, to basically offer specific things to the other side, or to accept changes in our negotiating position. So basically anything formal, anything that might end up in a written agreement could only be enunciated and represented by the chairs to limit, just to basically keep that control to make sure we didn't lose control of what we were doing. But everybody else could participate and was encouraged to participate and did participate in asking questions, in discussing the issues that were on the table, and in sharing stakeholder views. So for instance, again, our faculty at the table, I was basically viewed as being a librarian, which is my primary role at the moment, but our two faculty members are primarily faculty members. That's what they do full-time. And they could speak authentically to the faculty perception and the faculty interests in these agreements in a way that made it difficult for the publishers to tell us what our faculty wanted, which was their inclination in many cases. They wanted to tell us what the faculty wanted because they deal with them all the time, and our faculty members could raise their hands and say, excuse us, we are the faculty. We can speak to that ourselves. In our outside communications, as I said, we had a designated actually two designated spokespeople for outside public media, but we also had campus communications to deal with a lot. We did a lot of on-campus communication, and for that we combined our designated spokespeople from the negotiating team with a campus communications lead on every campus. Every library has somebody who deals with newsletters, communicating with faculty and administration, whatever it is. So each campus designated their communications lead who worked with our spokespeople to distribute information. Our central team would prepare templates, for instance, prepare letters if we're going to send out a letter, and then each campus could customize it for their particular environment, things like that. We created template web pages. Each campus could then customize, so we worked together like that. Preparation for the negotiation itself. We strongly recommend that you start by educating the team. If you have a team that is not fully experienced in negotiations and not fully knowledgeable about transformative agreements yet, or traditional agreements, you need to take some time to educate them on the process of negotiation and negotiating technique and what you're getting into in this. So take the time for the professional and experienced negotiators to have some coaching sessions, some mentoring sessions to prepare the other members of the team. Educate the team on the costs of the existing license and usage of the content. Get from your data analytics team, and make sure that everybody's up to speed on what the facts are and how those relate to the key issues that you're addressing, so that they can hold knowledgeable conversations with the publishers. We strongly urge people on the university side to make the opening presentation at a high level, to be the first to present. By being the first to present, you establish and set the playing field or the agenda. It's an important thing to do. By high level, we suggest that you focus primarily on your goals and objectives. What are you trying to accomplish? Why are you trying to accomplish that? What are some of the high-level arguments? For instance, if you're seeking a cost reduction, what evidence do you have that the cost currently is too high relative to other publishers or relative to usage. For instance, what's the cost per download of your current license? So present that analysis, and then also think hard about what's in it for the publisher. If you're thinking about this as somewhere you want to accomplish something new and difficult, it really needs to be a partnership. We've heard discussion about that, and Wiley made a very strong point about that the other day. The publisher, if you want the publisher to give some ground, the publisher is going to need to get something too. So what is in it for the publisher? And make that part of your presentation. Make it clear you're looking to work together to accomplish something that both sides would like to accomplish. Because then, once you agree that both sides are getting something out of it, as the Wiley folks said, it's a lot easier to then figure out how to get there once you agree on how both sides can benefit. So that opening presentation sets the ground, it sets the tone, it lets them know why you're there. Now you may say, well, what if they say they want to make the opening presentation? After all, there's some publishers in the room seeing my advice here, and we're being very public about it. We are the customers. It is really our position that we think that we have the right to say what we think the terms of the negotiation be about. What is it that we, the customers, want? And if the publisher really isn't interested in what its customers want, you have something to say to them about that. So we think it's quite appropriate, and it makes actually for a more productive negotiation if we start with the customer saying, here's our concern, here's our issue, here are our goals, here's what we're trying to accomplish, and feel very comfortable in taking that position. And then finally, have a pre-meeting meeting, and actually meetings before and after every session, to review the meeting objectives and what the presentation is going to be and what the roles are going to be during that meeting, who's going to say what, how far you can go, and so forth, and sort of set up the ground rules and remind everybody on the team. I'm out of time already, but this is the last topic, so let me move quickly through it. Some negotiation tactics. These are the things that are specifically written up in the toolkit that we've been making available, so I will go through them very quickly. Make the first proposal I've already talked about. Establish who speaks for the team I've already talked about. Don't make decisions in the room. This is a standard negotiating thing. It's not rude at all. It's expected, but inexperienced negotiators may not realize that. Once you have some discussion and you have some ideas and you think, well, maybe we could get somewhere, maybe we could adjust what we're asking for, maybe we could accept something they're offering, you don't have that discussion amongst yourselves or suddenly decide on behalf of your team to answer that. You say, we need to talk about this, and you get up and you go to another room to talk about it. Have pre- and post meetings for every session. Go in prepared. Make sure you've prepared right before the meeting so that everybody's ready. And then always schedule time afterwards to discuss what happened, to make sure you all agree on what happened in the room, to compare notes, and to talk about what your next steps are. Don't wait a day. Don't wait a week. Memories fade, and there will be disagreements, and you won't be as productive. Don't worry whether they like you. You're not there to be liked. You are there to be respected. You want folks to respect each other, especially in a long negotiation, as some negotiations go on for years. You need to be respectful of each other, but you don't need to be liked, which means you don't have to agree to what they want you to agree to. Don't feel like you have to give in so that they like you. They may give you a sense that they're disappointed in you. The word disappointed often comes up in negotiations. Oh, that's so disappointing. Too bad. They're going to be disappointed from time to time. They're not going to get everything they want. If they are, you're going to be paying a lot of money. So recognize that that's part of the technique, is to make people feel like, oh, I've got to be nice to them and give them what they want. No, you don't. State and repeat your key goals ad nauseum. If you state them at the front, you state them at every meeting, then, for instance, if you walk away from a negotiation, you will be walking away on principled grounds. They will know why you walked away, because they didn't meet your goals, because you did not achieve what you needed to achieve. It's also good for your communications and PR, because you'll be able to say, we announced our goals at the beginning, we stuck to our goals, we tried to accomplish it, we tried to find a way to get there that worked for them, we didn't make it, here's what we're doing, here's why we're doing it, and we're going to stand on those principles. So those are a very quick summary of some of the experience we've had and how you go in with a team that's different, and I thank you all for your attention.
Are there any questions for Jeffrey Mason? Jeffrey Mason, MacKie-Mason.
Hi. So could you elaborate on, like, a little bit with the UC system is like one system. It's very tight-knit as opposed to a lot of other consortia. Do you see this type of, any differences in this type of negotiation going on in a regular consortia where you actually have different entities that are not, like, that are really independent from each other?
Yeah. The University of California is actually sort of in the middle. Legally, we are a single institution, but by bylaws and operational practices, we're actually 10 separate universities. So we really have to work all the time on building and maintaining our internal coalition and agreement, which is, I think, the biggest issue for consortia that are loose-knit. Not as much as some consortia. We're more tightly knit than SAMLIC is, for instance, where there's greater independence. But still, it's there. And I think that really is the key thing I would say there is never forget that you have to get internal support and agreement on what you're doing, and you have to maintain that, and that requires nurturing and tending and communicating and listening and engaging all of the different stakeholders. If you try to do it, sort of to have the central office just do it and then tell everybody go along with it, when you're trying to do something very different and scary and challenging, things will fall apart. But so different consortia have different degrees of experience in working together and different histories of trust and so forth. We're sort of in the middle in that we do have a long history of working together and a fair bit of trust, but we don't all agree on what the objectives are, and we had to work hard on that and keep working on it all the time.
I recognize you, Robert.
Morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Hope you're well after the gala. I've got some hangover pills with me, and there's a gym for everyone who's got a stiff back or stiff legs. Jeff, you negotiate as a university that's like a closed grouping, closed entity. We as SANLIC, we've got about 26 university libraries, and there's, I think, about 6 research councils. So our negotiation team basically is the SANLIC executive with input from all. But what's worrying to us is that we negotiate. I was part of very vigorous negotiations in the past with the team. Then the publishers do not understand the African model, the developing society, the pricing for Africa and not for Europe or America. What's your comments on that?
That's a very good point at a couple of different levels. I'm glad you brought that up. I think I've talked a lot about communicating and educating within your own consortium, but you also need to educate and communicate with the publishers, both about the context and explain that, and also about the nature of how your consortium works. As a quick example, most of our negotiations with publishers traditionally are done by our central office, the California Digital Library. And they're used to thinking, in fact, they often refer to the University of California as the California Digital Library, which is just an office in the president's suite. Because they're so used to dealing with them as if they are the University of California. But they're just an office that works on behalf of the 10 campuses. When we went into these negotiations, where we didn't always have complete agreement across the 10 campuses, and we had such a complex constituency of faculty and administrators and university leaders, we couldn't come back with an answer to them sometimes within 20 minutes, go to a caucus room and come back with an answer. We couldn't sometimes for big questions, we couldn't come back with an answer for several weeks because we had to go back to our constituencies and vet major changes and proposals with the librarians, with the faculty senate, and with the university administrators, the chancellors and provosts. So we had to explain that to them and educate them because they weren't used to that. They were used to the California Digital Library being authorized to make all the decisions on the spot for standard subscriptions where it's just a little bit of how much price increase this year. But for these bigger things, so we had to spend a lot of time communicating and educating. I think understanding first yourself what the nature of your consortium is, how you're going to operate, how you're going to work on decision making, who has to be involved, and then spending a lot of time patiently and pleasantly explaining to the publishers what the nature of your organization is and how this is going to work is important so that they understand and are willing to work with that. It meant that some things would be slow. We literally, in this spring, had one situation where we had to tell them we can't answer that for a month because we have to go back to all of our stakeholders on that question. It's big enough that we have to go back and vet, and we spent the next month going to probably about 24 meetings just to get everybody informed and get the responses from them before we could go back to the publisher.
Colleagues, can we give Jeffrey MacKie-Mason a warm round of applause?
Thank you.
We've learned a lot from University of California.